Zach, starting off to a good start with the muted mic.
You told me you were really good with silence. So happy Monday. And I said Tuesday instead of Monday, but you couldn't hear that because of the microphone situation. Happy Monday, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Business Strategy Roundtable. Today we've got Matthew Schneider from Building Inc., who's going to teach us a bunch about Web3, blockchain, and the crypto world today. Matt, thank you so much for being here.
Hey, Zach, it's great to reconnect. Does anyone even know our origin story? Because it starts with Doug. Like, when was this? This was April of 2024. No, that was in Hong Kong. Doug and I were January of 2024. He and I were in a business pitch competition, trying to make it out to Hong Kong, and he had connected, or we had connected, and we were talking, and I was there pitching tokenization, which is why it's relevant here, and then made it out to Hong Kong. But yeah, at some point he introduced us, and it's been great talking with you. I'm looking forward to this episode, Zach. You are a great conversationalist.
I'm interesting at the very least because I'll ask the questions that are from way out of right field that people don't think of. So I like to keep people on their toes. I appreciate the compliment. I appreciate, more than anything, I appreciate uh, business leaders like you and thought leaders in some of these highly technical domains coming and sharing their knowledge with me because I'm a pizza guy. You know what I mean? I know people in pizza at a pretty high level, but there's a lot of things in this world that I would like to know more about, and when I get to exchange some time with somebody like you or somebody like my Uncle Doug, who you're talking about, it's a really, really valuable and wonderful experience. So thank you so much. Do you mind if I throw a little icebreaker at you?
Go for it.
Okay, so you told me before we went live that there are some upcoming changes from a legislation perspective. Now, I don't even know how to stay informed or how to dig into these different types of things. Can you talk about how an individual would go about following that type of thing to determine what changes are happening or where you get that type of information?
Yes. So first, I'd preface that there are some exciting things happening on Capitol Hill when it comes to legislation around cryptocurrencies or tokenization, and importantly, defining those two separately. That's been the whole holdup over the past however many years. What's a security? What's a cryptocurrency? What's a competing currency with the US dollar? And finally, we have either because it's lucrative as an industry or there's just been enough noise, we have an administration that wants to dive into the weeds, and it's become pretty bipartisan. I would say to keep up with that, because there is a lot of noise still, right? You have, I think it was Donald Trump Jr. saying, hey, there's going to be no uh, capital gains tax on cryptocurrencies made in the US. And that got people rallied up, but it wasn't actually a bill that was being pushed forward or has any sort of um, reality. It's not grounded in reality. Capital gains tax elimination on cryptocurrencies.
Yeah, and Donald Trump Jr. probably isn't the guy who's going to be able to he's probably not the one who pushes it through, you know?
No, no, just gets people excited, and he gets people
Right.
excited because he's going around talking at all these major events, and you're seeing more of that, with the Trump I forgot what their World Financial Liberty or Liberty whatever that is, that's making their rounds at the big events, and they're talking about how the US will be the center of attention. So there's still a lot of noise in that way, and a lot of it is on X or Twitter. That said, if you do want a lot of the breaking news, I think X and Twitter is the place to be. Like that's where you'll see the big headlines that a bill XXX just passed the House and it's moving forward, and here's what it's going to allow banks to do. Here's how it changes SEC precedents. This is how it changes for issuers and what licenses you need. Here's how it makes us competitive to other jurisdictions like Hong Kong, whose monetary authority is working overtime to get cryptocurrencies mainstream, or the United Arab Emirates, right? Their land authority has new laws that allow deeds to be native to blockchains, which is massive. So you have regulatory changes on all different levels, whether it's like federal and record keeping, or more at like a confined state slash municipal level. Lots of changes happening. So, and the good old news headlines, like that's a good way to separate noise. News headlines from mainstream sources aren't going to proudly echo what Donald Trump Jr. has to say about crypto. They'll just push like, "Hey, this bill actually passed. Here's how it changes things, and here's what Jamie Dimon has to say about it," right? Or here's what Goldman Sachs is doing. So you'll see these big players being name dropped, being associated with the changes, and that's an indication that this is legit. This is actual change being rolled out, not just a bunch of excitements and daydreaming.
Yeah, and some people are. I think that point about excitement and daydreaming, and you bringing up Donald Trump Jr. is making a statement, and how it can. I mean, part of it is interest and excitement moves the needle on certain coins, and not to suggest that that's the. I mean, I don't want to get into like any type of down the rabbit hole politics conversation. Not that it surely is worth having, but not to say whether or not Donald Trump Jr. is trying to influence the market, but it's so critical to be informing yourself intelligently, because there are people who are trying to do that type of thing. So being able to get good, solid, accurate information as it relates to cryptocurrency, or just these types of highly technical happenings in general, is really important. Um, any tips on specific people? It sounds like you kind of recommend maybe a smattering of folks, and trying to get the full picture. Is there anybody that you'd say, hey, like this Twitter account or this?
No, there isn't anyone in particular that I tune into, and I realize that the way that I addressed the question was on the regulatory side of things, like what's the official news and the happenings when it comes to the legality of all of this. But you could just look at like what's XRP doing with this bank, right? And that still legitimatizes the technology at an institutional level, but you have to look towards official press releases for that are coming out from the institutions and these corporations themselves saying, "This is the new partnership that we have. Here's how our technology is going to be applied." And I think that's just where you have to source a lot of that information, because when you have a market that is as malleable as the crypto market, where one tweet misinterpreted could pump a coin and within the next 30 minutes also rug that coin, and people are selling and taking profits,
Right.
you don't want to get caught up in that. And it's all done on purpose. Like it's meant to be very stimulating so that money flows into particular investments that are associated with the news, and then someone is going to walk away. So any sort of news flash that is uh, higher quality and is a legitimate monumental shift for the industry recognizes that, and they're very careful about how they roll that information out, because it would be like insider trading. Like you can't say, "Hey, we have a brand new weapon of mass destruction that's going to be rolled out by um, Texas Instruments. It's going to be utilized, and oh, timely. There's a new war, right? A lot of that would be deemed insider trading because you're dropping insight on this, and you know what's happening next. So they're very careful about how this information comes out and when you're dealing with the big players, and it's the big players that are generally making moves that are noteworthy and have long-standing
Right.
impact.
Well, thank you so much for that information and helping us break the ice. We're going to dive into your journey, so that as we talk about how Web3, crypto, and blockchain are going to be used in the SMB world and in the world in general. I'd love for the audience to be able to get an understanding of how you became an expert in the space and how you became interested in it, because it's one of the furthest forward things technologically these days, and there's not a ton of people. I I think it's safe to say there isn't a massive percentage of people that are comfortable with their Web3 or blockchain knowledge, and I certainly would put myself in that category.
Yes, I think that's a widespread sentiment. And that's okay. It takes time to separate the signal from the noise, which is the big problem that the industry has. That's why I'm saying look at the legitimate headlines, look for the big companies that are making moves. Because if you take any person who is not adjusted to this buzz atmosphere that wraps around crypto and you jump on Twitter and you see a bajillion coins being shilled and people losing money and scams all over the place, you're going to say, wow, this is actually not a technology I want to be involved in. And in fact, you don't even perceive it as a technology. You probably think of it as a new way to gamble. And that's not what the underlying technology was supposed to represent. It was supposed to be a peer to peer mechanism where you and I can move money in a digital realm. In real life, I can give you cash. How do I do it online? I need a bunch of parties, intermediaries. And then just because we're using them, they take a little bit off the top. That's how you get those processing fees. And it takes time. So that, I mean, that was the envision for Bitcoin. And then that evolved. Well, what else is peer to peer? Well, any sort of transaction, any sort of movement in business, whether it's information or money. And the technology evolved, new business cases arose where people said, well, we could move ownership of a physical asset in this way. And usually I need a bunch of custodians and people to help me verify the transaction. And people said, no, look at a decentralized ledger. There is a better alternative way to handle this. So I think if you go back to the fundamentals of what the technology is supposed to be, people can appreciate it. They understand that there's always intermediaries in our transactions, whether it's me trying to purchase a burrito and you have that little kiosk, which is an intermediary, or online. And because online is so complex, there's sign into this, verify with this. This party is going to be processing your transaction. We use this to help you sign up. Like we know that there's a many different things that are getting involved in sometimes the most simple of tasks. So we could appreciate a more peer-to-peer transaction network, how it simplifies things. And then in the trust components, uh, how do we verify who's on the other end of that? How do we come to know that what was moved actually happened and trace that back? Because that's what the intermediaries are usually doing. Like we trust a third party to keep a record of it. And then if turns out we bought something and it was fraudulent, we can go back to the third party and dispute it, file a claim. So how do we embed that into a technology? And if people can appreciate that, then they're appreciating blockchain, the verification of transactions, the verification of other parties, the immutability, like looking back and saying, okay, there's no manipulation here. We can only change things going forward. We can't change the past about how this information or these assets moved. I like that. I trust that. And this is completely different than new coins coming out that you're going to put a bunch of money into and probably lose. So you have to separate these Wild West, uh, I don't even want to call them use cases, but instances that have arisen and separate that from what the technology was supposed to offer. It's the same thing how we're having a video call here. This is just communication. People have been communicating since people existed. But what else can you use a video call for? Lots of things, and sometimes bad things. So just understanding what's the technology, how do I appreciate that, and then investigating some of the use cases, which I think we're going to be doing today.
Absolutely, we are. Thank you for that. Uh, Tell us a little bit about your career journey or entrepreneurial journey,
Right.
because you're a young man
I
who is extremely knowledgeable in some niche spaces. You have knowledge at a young age that many, like I was saying, there's a very large percentage of people that are not comfortable with this stuff. So talk a little bit about how you became interested, or I mean, it doesn't have to start at where you became interested, but I would love to understand how you got to this point, when the entrepreneurial spirit kind of kicked in for you, when you got interested in blockchain, what you thought you were going to do when you
I
were
yeah.
10.
Well, I appreciate you for lassoing me in because I realize now that was the other part of the conversation, and I kind of didn't direct that where I wanted or where I meant, which was, well, so how did I get involved in it? Pulling from capital markets and real estate, and then discovering this technology and saying, let's look at the real use cases. If you really want to backtrack to 10 years old, at 9, I was programming Minecraft
No
servers.
shit.
I was going on YouTube. I was figuring out what is port forwarding? How do I open up my parents' router so that people can join me on my Minecraft world? And then I was marketing these servers that I was creating. And I mean, honestly, I had more fun administrating the server. So I was figuring out how do I code plugins? How do I set up permission systems? How do I have an operational hierarchy? Like I need moderators. What responsibilities are they going to have? How do they oversee people? And then how do I get people to join? And how do I balance all of this? And that was at 9, believe it or not. That was I'm impressed. That's why I bring it up. That said, it wasn't like a
Well, that's
I
why
don't know
I
if it was
ask, because
truly
I see you. Like, I see you, and I know there's an interesting story, because I know a lot of interesting people and not interesting people. And the interesting people always have a spark and an engagement at a young age towards something. You know what I mean? And it is an amazing story. It is impressive. I don't know a lot of 9-year-olds that are that comfortable or competent, especially as it relates to directing and marketing to people, which are very, for as technical as it sounds like you were at a young age, there's an extremely impressive balance there when you're creating a systems that people are going to be able to use and people are interested in. So, I mean, no surprise.
yeah, I'll say it ignited the spark to build something and take on a leadership role, but I don't know if it was really the beginning of my entrepreneurship. I wasn't monetizing this, and while I went on to host servers year after year, because that's what kids do in school, like you play games with other people, and so it's like, hey, I'm going to be the host. I think my entrepreneurial kick really started when I decided to stop doing my homework and start working on a manuscript for a book that I published when I was 17 years
Wow.
old. Now, I don't talk about it too much because if you go read it, you're going to think, wow, this was written by a 17-year-old. It's not like any sort of piece of art. However, the fact that it's 90,000 words, which is a little bit longer than your average novel, and it was this cool science fiction action packed. I suppose it's not any more violent than a lot of the stuff that people are watching on Netflix. In fact, it's probably equivalent to a Disney version of Star Wars at this point. It wasn't like a Pulp Fiction watermelon head exploding type of effect, but it was 17-year-old playing video games. What if we wrote about this and tried to infuse a narrow world view into something? So that was that. Then I tried to get into music. I was working on music for a while. I've always been a musician, still am. I was writing a bunch of stuff. I got some software, started making beats and thinking like, oh, this is cool. This is creative. I can set up a Spotify account for free. Let me put my music out there. I did that for a couple years, and then I realized I really needed to find something that uh, well, follow the money, right? That's what they always say. Find something that's going to be a little bit more lucrative and turn into a business case. Not that I couldn't with a music artist, becoming a music artist, but
A little harder.
it's a passion. And yeah, right. And I'm glad that it's stayed a passion because then I can enjoy it. And all the business stuff that I do, I can, that's the real problem solving and just the stress associated with it. It's a different environment. And now I can fall back on music as something that I enjoy, as opposed to that
Right.
being something that just becomes businessified, right? So I did that. Then I got into capital markets. I decided college wasn't going to be for me, so I started day trading. I was doing tons of studying. I call it my street knowledge of investment
How did your
banking.
parents and your
Uh,
teachers react?
Well, teachers now, they're sending me messages saying, "Hey, so great to see how far you've come and how much you've accomplished. It's amazing. It's spectacular. We love seeing you travel the world and be so knowledgeable about this type of stuff." Back then, it's really hard to differentiate between someone who doesn't want to participate in school because they don't have a bright future ahead of them, and those who are carving their own path. And everyone likes to think that they're in the latter category, like, "Oh, I don't need school. I'm gonna do whatever I want." But then they use their free time to just play video games, right? Or like mope around. I was using all the time that I had to try to build stuff, to study on my own, to figure out like how do I go become a businessman? How do I be an entrepreneur? What's the stock market stuff that is now very trendy, but at the time was just starting to tick up. So I was researching that. People found it pretty ambitious, and for an 18, 19-year-old, it was, right? There's a lot of psychology and maturity that's needed to make moves in the market. It's not just fundamental and technical analysis, it's also how your emotions play into the money that you're making or losing, and most of the time, losing. It really takes a sound mind to understand that markets are probabilistic and you're going to lose a lot of the time. But as long as you only lose 40, well, as long as your risk ratios are adjusted to the probability of you winning, then you can make it out fine. But as a kid, you don't understand that. You just see it, well, I'm losing money, and then you crash out. You're not thinking, well, as I can lose more than I win as long as I make more money when I do win. And it starts to balance out, right? That's how traders think. That's how I think now. So I did that for a while, and then I started to make the shift into commercial real estate, which is obviously what building is now. I realized that this is a very big industry and market, has a lot of opportunities because it has a lot of problems. And there's problems in the way that money moves, in the way that projects are constructed, and again, how money moves, because when you have delays, the banks get weary, and then you need all sorts of financing options. And that sort of alludes to what's going on in DeFi, where people need access to money and liquidity, transparency, data symmetry. But a lot of it, what it traces back to is there's interactions between parties, whether it's the property owner and a general contractor, or a bank and the sponsor. Like there's all these relationships that exist, and you can start to see how it resembles some of the connectivity that a peer-to-peer network, a blockchain, would enable. Like how do we move information or move money between two parties, or between 15 different parties, and have them all in the same system? How do we all look at the same information and trust it, and then move, instead of from one person WhatsApp it to another person who emails it, they put it into Google Drive, it becomes outdated, it gets emailed, and then you have 15 parties moving independently. How do we all use the same ledger system, which is what a blockchain is? A ledger records that something has been transacted. How do we all use the same system for that? And it's just, I think this business case is phenomenal when you understand that that component and how it holds up the banking industry, the construction industry, well, anything for that matter. But really, the built world is just this massive multi trillion dollar industry. So if you can solve the problem there, where it's very complex but very lucrative, then you have proven the technology in the most brutal environments, and that means that it's here to stay. Right? If you can show how something like blockchain is used in construction of all things, well, that means it's probably a pretty darn good technology, and I could start to apply it to other industries that are not so regulated, complex, outdated, analog. It's optimistic, and that's what we've done. I think that's the precedence that we're setting with these use cases. Why it's inspiring people, like it's just a back to basics, good old use of the technology, but we're still getting people wound up because I'm showing that it means something bigger for the technology. It paints a bright future, I think.
Absolutely. I've got a million questions, and I'm gonna try to hone them in. Um, at what point did you start to educate yourself on web on blockchain? Um, and at what point did you realize I should shift into this space very heavily.
It was at the same time that I was getting into commercial real estate. A friend told me, "Hey, I saw that someone was going on Google Maps." It was a Chinese company. Was going on Google Maps, slicing it into little squares, and then they were selling squares, and they were using blockchain technology for that. And I thought, well, that's a ridiculous thing for anyone to buy, like squares of Google Maps, and try to pretend that they own the real estate. Like, what? Why don't you take the actual stuff that people use to transact real estate, equity, debts, and titles, and make that on the blockchain? And I started to look into that and I see, well, there were some people who had thought of this years prior. It seems pretty optimistic. And I've got this entrepreneurial bug. I want to be in the commercial real estate industry or real estate at large. Maybe I should investigate this further. I did fall into the trap where I wanted to use blockchain to as a silver bullet, right? I thought it would create more liquidity, that people would be interested in it just for the technology, which a lot of entrepreneurs go through. They're like, well, I have stunning technology. It's a very cool product. If I built it, they'll come. That wasn't the reality. So I was working on use cases that overpromised and didn't meet market demand. And that realization is when I went from someone who was interested in Web3 and had worked on a project to someone who became a leader and innovator in the technology. Because then I said, well, what are people overlooking? What are 90% of people overlooking? The technology is it's here, but it's not being taken seriously. A lot of projects have arisen and then they go out of business. What can I do differently? Like my objective is not to blend in and just be another person building in the space. Like I kind of have that. Let's be the one. Let's be the Apple. Let's build something that's timeless, and that means you have to go against the grain a little bit. So I started looking at the alternatives, and I'm grateful that folks like Jonathan Chambliss, cross paths with me, because he was come from the construction industry. He was also interested in blockchain. He said, let's work on something together. And we were looking at uh, things that were unsexy uses of the technology, the data. Like how can we use this to make data more verifiable? But
Mm,
it became a niche. I think that's the bottom line here. Is I niched down further. I niched down further, and I went against the grain. Those two principles are what makes someone a leader as opposed to someone who's just interested. Right? I was researching on my own, designing things and coming up with concepts that were unfamiliar to most people in the industry. And that gets people's attention.
right,
Like, what are you talking about and why are you talking
right,
about it? Then it goes to the next step, which is it defensible? You can say something outlandish, but is it actually true? And when you turn it into a business model and you say, well, we're going to bet on it and I'm going to sell it to people, and then people bought it, and that works. And then just as from a logical standpoint, people are like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Well, then the idea becomes defensible, and it attracts its own audience. It has gravity, and so that's sort of my journey into researching the technology. One, I was interested in it, but two, it's a
right.
frontier. People are still exploring it. So if you do land, if you do discover gold, you've done something amazing, and that's my aspiration.
Awesome. Talk a little bit about when you were understanding and learning about the technology and how you might, if you were recommending to somebody that was educating theirself on the technology at a base level, not necessarily in terms of how to, build a company around it, but to be a good steward of their own knowledge in the economy. Juxtapose your learning experience with what you would say, hey, I went through learning and this is what you should focus on, or this is some of the stumbling blocks that took me a little while to understand.
Well, always start with the nomenclature. Like, what words are being passed around? What is a blockchain? Who has defined it out there? IBM has defined it. Chainlink has defined it. The SEC might have stuff on it now. Okay, that's interesting. So now I know about the words. I know about the concepts, and you have to do a little bit of rabbit hole, right? You might have to click on some Wikipedia pages and some hyperlinks in order to discover more. Like, what is a block? Why is it chained? And then figuring more. But that's your baseline. Okay, so now you know enough about the technology from a like conceptual level. Let's move to application. Who has tried to use it? Like, who is using blockchain right now? Walmart. Why? IBM. Why? Goldman Sachs. Why? And what this does is now you're taking just general knowledge, which can be applied to any industry, and you're moving into application level. And that's where the real learning occurs, because it's how you take what you know and you're like, oh, I could see this fitting into the real world. And you start to get some of your own ideas, like, oh, I wonder if anyone has tried to use it in this way. Let me research that. And maybe no one hasn't. You go build a company around it. But it all starts with just understanding the core vocabulary. And then you put some of the vocabulary together and that forms concepts. And then you move into the applications and just Google, like, what are the different uses for this? Well, crypto is going to show up, cryptocurrencies. And then you're going to see, well, there's different types. Okay, there's a Bitcoin. Okay, so it was trying to be like digital gold, digital cash. And then you're going to find a new word in there. It's going to be an altcoin. Well, what's an altcoin? It's an alternative to Bitcoin. Why do these show up? Yeah, and then you just sort of rabbit hole it that way, looking at the different applications. And throughout this process, you should stay neutral. Don't decide yet what's good or bad. Just have an open mind and see, like, what have people come up with? And then what were their business models? Where are the founders now? This guy was just a scammer.
Right.
This lady actually had a purpose for the technology. And then understanding how their minds were working and putting yourself in their shoes. And that's perspective, right? So you have these different tiers of how you learn about something. And I think that's the path that you follow. It's vocabulary, concepts, application, perspective. I just came up with that. I don't know if anyone's has like an actual pyramid of learning, but uh, that's how I think that this would unravel. It's just Googling and researching. And now we have ChatGPT. So you could say, what is blockchain?
Right.
Dot, dot, dot. How has anyone used it? Dot, dot, dot. And opening it up that way. Why didn't it work in this case? Because there's many instances that it didn't work out. And understanding
Very
that.
cool. I like that recommendation for utilizing the AI resources that we have for research and understanding, because they'll break it apart. The AI systems that exist will break apart a question in a level of detail and complexity, and they will consider it in a level of detail and complexity that no TED Talk or no other, encyclopedia style reports are going to be able to break it down without you consuming all that information that the AI can do in a heartbeat. So that's a great point. Let's transition now, if you don't mind, into topic of the day. How the hell is blockchain being used out in the world now? And maybe even as you transition into that, my cat just decided to throw some things on the ground, very cat-like. Um, what maybe before you go into how it's being used, maybe a quick overview on what the fuck is blockchain and how does it relate to Web3 and cryptocurrency? Kind of like a little brief overview. You don't have to. I don't know if it's possible to go into a depth, but
Sure. Well, my gut instinct is that if someone saw real world blockchain applications, they're probably familiar with blockchain a little bit. But we should reiterate that this is a
maybe,
digital ledger.
maybe, but they also
But
might see these on
maybe
TikToks when they get cut up. So
that's true.
I want
That's
to help
true.
people that don't
So
know
look,
shit, man. I want to help all those poor sons of bitches that spent 25 years making pizzas and their bodies are breaking down and they want to figure out how to know what's happening in the world. So
well, you earned yourself an explicit badge on all the
that's
streaming
right.
platforms in the
I,
past
I
60
click not
seconds.
I click not for kids when I put it on Spotify and YouTube. You can say one too if you
So
want.
back Back to the basics. A blockchain is a digital ledger. It's a digital immutable ledger for recording transactions. Transactions can be of anything. It could be information. I tell you
What's
something.
immutable?
I give you something. It can't be retroactively modified. So I can't go back and change the past. I can only build on top of it. And that's really good to know. Um, if you and I transact in some way, I'm buying something from you. I give you currency. You give me goods. We don't want some point in the future to look back and the numbers have changed, right? We can continue to transact and build on top of that, and it's like building blocks, but you're never going to be able to pull out and modify the past. And for a tool of verification, that's what it is. It's a tool for verifying that something happened. This is very useful, and it's very useful at scale. It's useful when there's tons of people involved, many parties, and we know that's very true for finance in particular. There's and supply chain, like any time that something is moving and exchanging hands, you have different people, different systems, different registries, computers. You have information that's held in my hard drive and it's not in the cloud, and like there's a thousand things that can go wrong. And there's a thousand different ways. It's like the game of telephone, right? Everyone's played a game of telephone where you whisper something and then they mishear it and it goes to the next person. It gets misheard. It goes to the next, and you come around, and what you started with is not what you've ended with. It's the same thing with information where things get changed, lost. It's like there's air leaks, right? In your piping where, oh, this number fell off. This document changed. Now it's outdated. How do we start to synchronize this stuff? And that's as a technology, the big opportunity for blockchain, because it's not just an immutable ledger, but there's one word that I've left out until now. It's a decentralized ledger, which means that this ledger is not in the control of just one person, one party. So you have a few different buzzwords going on. You have immutable, right? So it can't be changed retroactively. You have digital. This is online. It's in our computers. And then it's decentralized. We can all contribute to a blockchain. We can all read a blockchain. We're all part of the system. And that means if you have 1,000 different nodes in this network, if you have 1,000 different players in this game, if you just take out one, the whole thing doesn't fall apart. If we're dependent on something in the center that's federated, like think of the federal government. This is why the U.S. exists the way that it does. If the federal government disappeared, you still have state governments. Okay, so it's the same thing with a computer system. Maybe there's one server that has everyone's information and it gets hacked. Now everyone's compromised, or there's a power outage and there isn't energy going to this data center. Well, then we'd lose everything. So these systems become decentralized, and we do that because they're more resilient and they're resistant to becoming compromised. So immutable, digital, decentralized. Some people say distributed. It's all over the place. And as a technology, it's a massive advancement in how we're able to interact online, how we own things, how we view and store information. It's almost its own economy because we start engaging with one another instead of just one central entity that takes our money, right? Zach, I can transact with you directly, or I, I mean, there's just many different business cases. I don't want to get into compute, which is something that Doug has worked
Get
on,
into it.
or
If
uh,
it's applicable, I mean, if you think we have enough time and you
well,
think it's
it is.
applicable, feel free.
I don't know that we have enough time, but there's a lot of different use cases that have arisen where people realized I can transact with millions of people directly online, and it's just creates new ways to make money, right? That's I go back to its own economy because we're working directly with one another. A lot of this stuff wouldn't be possible if you haven't a middleman who takes a cut off the top, because then it's not profitable as
Right.
much anymore, or they just block the transactions outright. But that's sort of a tangent, but it's I guess it's an insight to different real world applications, people realize that since blockchain is decentralized, it means that you can have a bunch of people interacting with one another and moving goods and services on their own terms and in an environment that's considerably more trusted or should be more trusted than traditional methods. Because again, it's digital, it's immutable. So if I transact with you, I can see, okay, you're sending me the money, I received the money, you got what I was sending you. Um, there was a another term that came to mind, and as soon as it comes back to mind, I'm going to programmable. Okay, so now there's another element. So why would you want to use something that's blockchain based? Um, because it's programmable as well. Another buzzword I know, but it's basic computer code. If this, then that. If Zach has enough money in his wallet, and if I have the title to a property, and the computer confirms that, then the transaction happens. If that, then why? And it happens instantly because it's programmed. And so you just have this system of transactions that's considerably more efficient than a traditional method where people have to double check. What does Zach have? What does Matthew have? Are they telling the truth? Okay, now we're going to put it into custody. Okay, now we're going to facilitate the transaction. Something went wrong. We have to check our books. It's going to take 5 days to settle. Okay, everything's clear. Oh, nope, something's still not right. We have to reverse it. Like the way that you remedy all of that is just by being right in the first
Yeah.
place.
And you sort of-
Instead of letting things go wrong, you just have to verify it up front that this transaction only occurs if certain parameters are met. And then it does so automatically without a person needing to be involved in that. So it can happen instantly. It can happen any time of day. I mean, that's a level of operational efficiency that is kind of difficult to fathom, especially at scale. Because again, now start talking about big industries where there's tons of parties involved and there's millions of dollars at stake and there's all these different systems. And usually you have all these checkpoints. But if the whole transaction, like think of um, a letter of credit and supply chain, like a lot of that stuff could be alleviated because you don't need different insurance companies. You don't need a lot of people marking something at designated checkpoints, and then you have credits because we're got to pay for it before we get the goods, and then like it's just such a convoluted system. But if we're based off of an indisputable, if this happens then that, then you compress a supply chain deal down to mere maybe weeks, because this can be drawn out over months. Like, hey, this didn't pass our we were overlooking the information is incorrect. So now the whole thing stalls. We have to go back to different companies. Our paper records were incorrect. We have to fax it to you. It's like that's one way to take a simple transaction and draw it out to months. And it just slows down the whole world in that way.
Absolutely. I think the piece about it being immutable and multiple people can be, I mean, obviously, that is a huge element of it, but that lots of parties can be involved and we can have the security and the accuracy verified. I mean, that is something that we do I mean, where does fraud happen? Where do bad actors behave or, influence with those behaviors? It's where there's gray. It's where you're not really able to shine the light on and have certainty on the circumstance. And people that are willing to, because of their integrity, will get into those gray spaces and they will behave. It's like the alleyways. It's like the alleyways at night. Like, yeah, you're not going to get, you know, uh, in likely not going to have a circumstance with somebody negative in the most lit, populated place, but in the spaces where you're not able to focus on the detail, that's where shit goes wrong. And I just hear that the technology solves for that. Now, obviously, there's an energy component to it, But I feel very optimistic that we're solving around some of those things with some high level technologies. So this seems like something that we can use to eliminate fraud and create more efficiency within transactions. It sounds fantastic. It sounds like a big win.
Correct. Correct. Now, there's going to be skeptics right off the bat. Like, what about these cryptocurrencies that people invested into and rugged? But that's not a failure of the
Yeah.
technology. That's a failure of
Yep.
people and investment
Yep.
laws that's
Regulation.
enabled. The technology, though, happens or functions exactly as we'd want it to, where it's two parties, we transact, we move, and the transaction's there, and then I can look at
Right.
my loss forever.
But because of,
You know,
forgive me for cutting you off, but because of where we're at from a regulatory perspective, those bad actors are able to do bad actions without the regulatory repercussions. Similar to when we had new technology like the car, there wasn't regulation around like, no, you need a seatbelt in it. Like the car works great. It gets you from here to there. You're able to go up to 120 miles an hour. You get your door, you honk honk, you're doing your whole thing. It all works as we expected, just like you're describing with the blockchain technology. Except sometimes bad things are happening because it's new technology and we haven't kind of shaved out the edges of what is and is not acceptable, or what do we need on the human and process side to support the technology so that the human and the processes can feel optimally good about it as much as possible.
right. Technology is functioning just as it should. I mean, going back to the car example, right? You're putting fuel, and then you have pistons that ignite, and it's all just to turn an axle and get the wheels. But who's behind the
Right.
steering wheel is a completely different matter. It's the same thing with blockchain technology. I can use this to streamline the due diligence process and add verification to the underwriting of a real estate property, or we could be creating coins that are being solicited online. And that it's not even the technology at that point. You're buying into a really good salesperson. And it just happens to be, unfortunately, the medium to buy into that is on this technology. And it's like you said, it's only on this technology because it's an generally unregulated environment. But the problem why it's an unregulated environment is because it's not just as simple as saying, well, every sort of cryptocurrency or token that exists is now a security. That's what the law tried to implement, at least in the US. We said, well, every token is a security, but they're not always. Sometimes they're supposed to be currencies that represent the US dollar. Like that shouldn't be a security. And when I say security, so the Securities and Exchange Commission is part of the US government, and they determine what out there is being bought for investment purposes. And the word that represents something being bought for investment purposes is a security. A like, the same way as security measures might be spelled, a security. And so a lot of people are buying crypto, right? And sometimes you need to do that for reasons that we won't get into. It's just participating in in that technology.
She's covering you,
But
man. She wants me looking at her, not at you, and she's not gonna fly.
um, but sometimes we want to be involved with blockchain technology without it being classified as a security, because securities are limited to rich people, generally
Mm.
speaking, or they're heavily regulated. Well, like I shouldn't have to be an accredited investor, which means I'd make $200,000 per year in order to use blockchain to verify a construction transaction. So you would think these things are entirely unrelated. Like, what does that have to do with the other? But the way that the regulation is set up right now, that's exactly how it's treated, and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So, in order to go from hyper or over-regulated into the proper area, you go through this weird gray transition period where you then deregulate and you set up sandbox environments, which sounds exactly like it is a place to play. And how do we use the technology in creative ways? And then this reveals the use cases. Those people meet on Capitol Hill. They say, here's how you would adjust the law so that we can use the technology appropriately without retrofitting it to these outdated laws from 1933.
Hmm.
Because we have immediately when a technology comes out, and you're starting to see this with AI as well. When you think about copyright laws, like how do we fit new technology into existing laws? Like we know that we can't just freely use other people's content that they've created, but that's exactly what AI does. Just goes out there, it scrapes it, absorbs it, gets trained on it, spits out an answer for us. And then because it's reworded, we just take it as our own. And then I can write a blog post about something that really just plagiarized someone else's work that the AI referenced. So, I mean, to apply the existing regulation, you'd say, well, okay, AI is outlawed. Large language, at least large language models that are going online and collecting information are outlawed because it's going to use other people's content, copyrighted content. Okay, so it's outlawed. No more. Like that. I don't know if that's the right approach.
Right.
I'd say it's not the right
Right.
approach.
It's a
But
good way to slow
so
down
then you
innovation.
have yes, you'd halt it
Right.
altogether, but at the same time, you have people committing acts that are technically
Right.
illegal, and it's the same thing in blockchain technology where it's like, well, we could create a cryptocurrency, and if it's not going to be a security, then I can do illegal things because it means I can sell this. I can tell people it's going to go up, and then it actually does, and then I make money, and then maybe they lose money. And this is so just sort of drawing parallels there between AI and blockchain, where well, we don't have new laws, so let's try to fit it into existing laws. And it doesn't fit. It's a round peg in a square hole, and it starts to break things. But sometimes it's better than having a complete lawless
Well, and our
environment
laws don't
for the
move very
technology.
fast. Probably another application of blockchain somehow.
Um,
Or excuse me, I said our laws
mm,
don't move very fast. Our Congress and our doesn't seem to move very fast.
right, right. I don't know where blockchain would necessarily fit into that. I think that's just
I
more of
would
a
love if all of the bills and I would
partisan
love if
issue.
all of the bills and all of the things that were discussed were immutable.
Well, they are recorded online, right? We can go online and see an archive of every
Can they
bill and where
change
it
any of that?
fits. They could. I don't know if they do. I guess we wouldn't know if they do. Right? That's sort of the 1984 uh, memory holding information where we can
You see what I'm
change
saying?
information
It's
in
history.
the past.
It's literally history. History should be on blockchain.
Yeah, I think there would be a lot of examples. Question is how do you get it on the blockchain? Because blockchains aren't storage systems, they're just ledgers. So they record that something has changed in storage,
Mm.
but they don't store the information themselves. So you still have to store the information somewhere. And you have to have the right connection in place so that anytime the items in storage change, it gets recorded on the blockchain.
Couldn't it just be ones and zeros? I mean, I hate to say that sounding like I hate to oversimplify it because I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. But if it's math, I mean, computers is just math. Everything we do is just math. Couldn't it just be ones and zeros?
Yeah, but the question is how many ones and zeros can you keep in one place? And a blockchain isn't meant to hold gigabytes of
Could, couldn't it if
data.
we
It just has the record of transaction and then maybe 5 attributes about that transaction. Like, what are the 2 parties involved? When did this take place? What was the name of the
could it be
transaction?
used if we had renewable energy like, fusion technology that is hyper cost efficient?
I'm gonna make an analogy. So, you own a warehouse with a bunch of stuff inside of it, and then, Zach, you stand at the garage door with a clipboard. The blockchain is the clipboard. It's just recording that boxes came in or out. It doesn't have the space to store a
Mm.
warehouse unless you have a black hole. Then you could take everything in the warehouse and, whoop, and then hold it in the clipboard. And it's the same thing with storage, where storage, we think of it just being in the cloud, but it takes up physical space, right? Hard drives, physically exist, and that's where information is recorded. Sometimes in megabytes and gigabytes and petabytes, terabytes and petabytes, and you have these large data centers. Um, and just fundamentally as a technology, blockchain isn't constructed to store anything. Like it doesn't have really a physical component. It's just it's computing that a transaction has occurred. Now, some people have tried to decentralize storage. They should look into, if you're interested in that, you should look into Filecoin. But it's still not a storage mechanism. It's just a record that something has been stored. Think of the what are those called? Clipboards. Think of the clipboard in the warehouse analogy. Same thing. Blockchain is just the record of transaction that things have moved in and out, that a transaction has occurred. But a clipboard that you can't go back and you can't write over, you can't erase, you can't change. I couldn't even add an extra zero in any way. It's impossible.
Well, it seems like there's tons of ways it could be used, and I'm interested to see how that develops over time. I think I'm excited, and I'm glad there are smart people like you out there leading the frontier and figuring all that shit out. Is there anything with the last 2 minutes that we didn't hit on that we should have hit on? We kind of ran around the whole darn thing a couple of times, and I'm grateful for that. I learned a
So
bunch.
I guess the reason why we didn't zero in on a particular real world application is because once you understand the principles of the technology, you can apply it to any industry. Transactions occur in every industry. Doesn't matter if it's real estate, construction, finance, supply chain, payments. Stuff moves, money moves, information moves. You want to do it in a verified and efficient way. And that's what a blockchain offers. And so you could start to imagine whether it's what building does, where, hey, you have a bunch of real estate information. Oftentimes it's outdated or it's fragmented or it's unverified. What if there was a way to start verifying that so that when the appraiser comes in, when an auditor, when the accountant, when a new construction company or the new owner comes in, they can see a record of how all of this information was added, updated, and then some attributes about that: who, what, where, why, when, how. Right? That's really good to know, especially when it's a multi-million dollar or hundreds of millions of dollars deal. Right? The stakes are very high, and correct information is important in that case. But the same thing can be said for supply chain. Lots of moving parts, lots of people involved, lots of different countries and borders and laws. We need to start to standardize and unify that. And a blockchain is a verification tool that can become that infrastructure. It can become the rails on which value and information is exchanged in a way that's, we believe in it, we trust it, and in fact we don't even have to trust one another. The whole process becomes trustless, and it's still lightning fast. It's digital. So that's just, if you understand the basics of the technology, you can start to see new uses for it in all sorts of industries.
Awesome. Matt, thanks again for joining us and sharing your knowledge with us. Any final thoughts or anything you'd like to share about building or anything along those lines?
Well, you can learn more about building. You can go to www.building.inc, and it's spelled INC like incorporated. So building.inc. Learn about some of the use cases that we have, how we're applying the technology, and we're passionate about real estate. We think data is very valuable. Data needs to be verifiable. Blockchains are methods for doing that. We didn't even talk about the crossroads of AI and blockchain. Talk about AI, right? So much movement in AI, information being pulled from where. How do we trust this? How do we attribute it? Blockchains are methods of that. Where did it come from? Where's it going? Right? And if we can record that immutably. So I guess my little CTA is people who are involved in real estate. I would love to see if building is an opportunity for you as a solution or as a partner. We love to collaborate. I'm always here as a resource, so I do a lot on LinkedIn. Talk about this stuff. I travel many different places, sometimes the world, to hold a microphone and explain blockchain use cases to folks. Uh, so just consider me someone that you can reach out to and speak with about this or any ideas that you have.
Awesome. Matthew, thank you so much. Thanks to the folks that joined us today and that are listening to this in the future. Happy Monday, and we'll see you on our next episode. Bye,
Awesome.
everybody.
Thanks, Zach.
Thanks.